Hello and welcome back to the Ask Abhijit show. I hope you're all doing very well. It's been a while since we had this live stream. I've been traveling a lot, but here we are. I'm back. So I hope you're all very well and thank you very much for being on this live stream with me. Uh, as you note, this is a live stream in which I'm gonna take questions from the live chat only, not from questions asked in the comments, so that this is a more interactive session, and there's more interaction, and you can ask questions that I would otherwise maybe miss. So that's what we will do tonight, and let's see who all is there on the live stream. I can see Shushrut, Abhishek Sharma, Rogue Gamer, Debosman, Pratik, Celestial Dust, Suraj, Aman Saini, Sunny, Imran, Shushrut, Abhishek, Rogue Gamer, Anupam, Adele, Kodzer, Saksham, Aditya, DK Boss, Herbie on Wheels, Vidhan, Challenge Accepted, Sanat, Sonia, Kalpana, Aryan, Kalind, Akash, Ajay Kumar, Praveen, Gituparna, Tanishk, Kosvi, Yashvardhan, Mebang, Kitlang, R. Sagar, Vanlal, Ruata, Prakhar, Joy Desai, Pratham, Snorlax, Arthik, Priyanshi, Vladimir Putin, Kedar, Harshit, Brijesh, Sumit, Vishal, Vinay Preet, Prashasta, Pilu.com, Akash, Kostav, Somyadeep, Vishnu, Sukhi, and lots of other people. It's good to see you all. Thank you so much for being here. I will not be able to greet you all individually, but yes, greetings. So with that done, let's get into the questions. If you have questions, start asking me now, and I'll take as many as I can from the live stream, from the live chat. So let's see, what do we have. Let us see, what do we have. Kalpana says, why didn't our kings do anything to save Nalanda University? Even if the university was burned, why was it not restored later? I'm sure our kings must have tried to resist the Turks. What was his name? Bakhtiar Khilji was the barbarian who destroyed the university. So he was able to do this because he was able to defeat the king, whoever it was, who ruled that area. So the king must have resisted. Indian kings must have resisted. The problem was that it was not that we did not resist. The problem was lack of political unity at that time. You see, Indian history is full of these cycles in which you have political unity under a single empire, and then the empire eventually dissolves, and then you have fragmentation, lots of little kingdoms. And when you have little kingdoms, they are all competing against each other, and that's what we call lack of unity. So instead of working together or having a single leadership, they're gonna be disunited, and that's when it's easy for outsiders to come in and do whatever they do. Plunder, pillage, invade, conquer, occupy. That's what they do. So our kings resisted. We have this, our education system, our history books, our teachers have created this impression that our kings did not do anything, which is completely wrong. Our kings resisted fiercely for centuries, but eventually we know what happened. So the process of the conquest of India by the Turks, that process took at least 3 or 4 centuries, and they were never able to conquer the entire subcontinent entirely. So there was a thing. So our kings resisted, but eventually the Bakhtiar Khilji was able to conquer that area, eastern India, and Bihar, what we call Bihar now, and they destroyed the university. And we are witnessing similar scenes in France right now. And even if the universe was burned, why was it not restored later? Well, the the library in that university burned for several months. So you can imagine how many books we lost. How do you restore that? Thousands of years of knowledge and records, historical records, scientific advancements, all of that was burned. How do you restore that? Knowledge is precious, wisdom is precious. It's recorded on fragile manuscripts and all that. Once that burns, it's gone. It's smoke. How do you restore that? And yeah, so that's a library. What about the university itself? Well, after that, the Turks ruled the area, And why would they want the university to be restored? It's not like they came there, they plundered, they destroyed, they burned, and then they left. No, you know. So there were waves upon waves of Turkic invasions, and eventually we know what happened, the Bengal Sultanate, right? So when you have a Turk ruling Bengal and eastern India, why would they allow the university to be restored and rebuilt? Won't happen. So, we had universities, great universities, Mahavishwavidyalayas, all across the length and the breadth of India, and none of them exists today. So, we were not allowed, our ancestors were not allowed to rebuild these universities. So, this is, a cautionary tale for us. We have to learn from our history. We can never allow this to happen again. And for that, we need political unity. Even today, India is disunited. Even today, Indians are fighting each other. You see this all the time on social media, sniping at each other and saying, "You are wrong, I'm right, you're wrong," fighting each other. Even today, the dominant identity for most Indians is the subnational identity. My region, my state, my language. And they identify by that first. They identify with that first, not as Indians. I may be Indian, but I am this or I am that. I speak this language. I'm from this region. I have this religion, maybe foreign religions or whatever, and just keep on fighting, fighting each other. This is the problem. We still have this problem, and we also have this federal system, federalism, which makes India so internally weak. All the energy is spent fighting inside. So that's the issue. So we still have much to learn and much to change. The system that has been imposed upon us, this parliamentary democracy system, is not ideal for India. We need a better system. I'm not saying we need to reject democracy. We need to have a better democratic system. We are the inventors of democracy, so to say. Democracy was, it first emerged out of India. So anyway, that's the deal. And yeah, that's the answer to that question in brief. Um Melvin says, "What do you think about Peter Zeihan's assessment on India not becoming a major power because with many internal problems? Is it true from his perspective, from his point?" Well, I have not read what he has written or said. I have not heard what he has said. But okay, so in case I'm aware of the guy. He is a geopolitical analyst. He has written a few books. I suppose, I believe, at least one. I don't remember the name, but anyhow, so assuming that he has made the assessment that India will not become a major power because of its many internal problems, there is some truth to that. See, Indians keep asking about when are we going to become a superpower. I would say forget about being a superpower or a Vishwaguru. Try to become a reasonably like semi-developed nation first. You can't sprint before you learn how to walk, and we are still learning how to walk. So, like I just said about the previous question, we have so many internal problems. It's true, we are so disunited. There is so much the subnational identities that we have in India. Every state in India fights the other. Certain states have political parties that espouse soft separatist ideology. The Aryan invasion theory has created this deep divide between the so-called Dravidians and the so-called Aryans, which is completely fictitious. It's the Aryan tourism theory or Aryan picnic theory now, but whatever. But people have internalized these fake ideas, because we are still taught this nonsense. So the first thing that needs to happen is we need to change the education system, improve it. you know so none of this is being addressed right now. We have what the new education policy, which is like putting um, putting band-aid on a gunshot wound, on a bullet wound. That's the kind of thing it is. It does nothing. It doesn't address the real issues. So yeah, we have lots of internal problems, but I'm sure the biggest problems, when you have very complicated issues, we need simple solutions. The more complicated a problem is, the simpler the solution has to be. So that's a good thing. Yeah, but it will take political will to change things. I think India will eventually become a major power. I think India is the only nation in the next 20 years that's whose major nation whose economy is going to keep growing. So I think we do have problems, but we do have strong points as well. And as long as we keep electing the right leaders, we're going to eventually be fine. I think it's a matter of time. Maybe in the next 10, 20 years, we may even have a new constitution. Things may change that much. Right now, this decade, the 2020s, it's a time of very rapid and significant geopolitical change that you typically see happen over decades. We are seeing it happen over years. So things could change significantly. And so I don't entirely agree with Peter Zehan's assessment that India will not become a major power. India does have major problems, major internal problems. But those can be solved with political will. So as long as we keep electing the right leaders, then eventually, they're going to chip away at the problems, and eventually there'll be a tipping point when the solutions will come much faster. So if Peter Zehan has made an assessment that India will not become a major power, I think I disagree with that very strongly. India will become a major power. Nobody can stop us. All right. Now let us see. Mm, let's see some of the questions. Anish says, could you please create a documentary style video on the Manipur matter to help clarify misconceptions? I've stayed away from the Manipur matter because it's an ongoing crisis. It's an ongoing issue. It's a very sensitive matter. And whenever something new happens, experts crop up. So when Galwan happened, all of a sudden you had all these China experts who cropped up. Everybody became a China expert. When Ukraine happened, everybody became a Russia and Ukraine expert. When the Titanic submarine sank or whatever happened, everybody became a submarine expert. And now everybody is becoming a Manipur expert. We need to be very careful not to believe everything that these so-called experts tell us on social media and journalists and all that. The matter is very complicated. It has historical roots that go back at least a century, if not 3 centuries. And this is an ongoing issue. So I have deliberately and consciously decided not to speak about this right now. It's a very complex issue. And there are certain things that will open up entire Pandora's boxes. You know, Certain issues that I think I should not speak about right now. So that's why I have consciously and deliberately not spoken about this. Maybe eventually I'll make a video. Maybe eventually I'll invite a guest who is a recognized expert on the matter and have them speak about this. Or maybe I will deal with this only from a geopolitical perspective. So I think eventually I will do it. But right now, it's a very sensitive matter. That's all I can say. So I would prefer not to speak too much about this right now. But yeah, it's a terrible situation, and it's a geopolitical matter. People see only the superficial surface level stuff of what's happening, and they'll say that nothing is being done. But you know uh, like I said, it's a complicated matter. It's actually a geopolitical issue. There are outside forces making this happen. The same way that what's happening in France, to some extent, has external, you know, has an external hand as well. Much of it is France's own fault, but there is an external hand as well in this. So something similar is happening in Manipur. All these terrorists who are terrorizing the natives of Manipur, who is organizing them all? Who is providing them the leadership and the coordination? Who is providing the funds? These questions have to be asked, and the spontaneous movements don't arise spontaneously. You need leadership, you need cohesion, you need organization, you need leadership, and you need funding. Where is it all coming from? So there's a whole lot that's happening right now. I just hope that things will simmer down peacefully, and I hope it's not only peace that is imposed but justice that is given, and the terrorists and the foreigners who have infiltrated in large numbers are evicted. That's what needs to happen. We are a nation of compromises. We keep compromising. We are a nation of low standards. We allow anybody to come into India and settle down and start claiming rights and all that. We need to raise our standards, like I keep saying on this show. We need to raise our standards. Right now we are a nation of low standards. We keep compromising with intolerant people. We need to crack down a little bit. Anyhow, that's the deal. Tejas says, why is France falling? Why are there more and more civil wars in Europe? Good question. Now this is something I can speak about a little more openly. uh, okay, so what's the deal with France right now? We know, uh, France is burning. Paris is burning. Lots of other cities, you have like wide scale rioting happening. You have individuals with automatic weapons who are firing. There is vandalism, there's arson. I don't know what people, I don't know if anyone's, you had casualties or not, but yeah. So apparently some immigrant male, 17 years old, was asked by the police to stop, and the guy did not listen to the cops, and he tried to drive off, and they shot him. So this is standard practice in the West. If a cop tells you to do something, you got to obey. If you don't obey, they can shoot you. That's just how it is in the West. So, and this individual, this boy, whoever he was, did not listen to the cops, so he got shot. And yeah, he happened to be, not an adult. He was 17. There are so many things that happen, but there is no outrage about that. I mean, these so-called immigrants or whoever, they have been doing all kinds of crimes against the natives, and none of that, evokes any outrage. But this issue suddenly it created this spontaneous outburst of rioting all across the length and the breadth of France. This is nonsense. This is clearly something that's coordinated and orchestrated. Now, from where is it happening? I don't know. But I would not say that France is not to blame. They have allowed so many immigrants into their nation. At least, I don't know, if you look at the total population of France, I would say 10 to 20% would be immigrants now. And these people have never assimilated. They have, first of all, never been allowed to assimilate properly. They have always been treated as second class citizens. There's a lot of racism. Okay, so France is not blameless entirely. They have this terrible legacy of colonialism in North Africa, in Algeria, and other parts of Africa. They did all kinds of brutalities and all that. They are still actively engaged in neo-colonization in large parts of Africa, the French. Okay, so they are not blameless. And lots of these immigrants, lots of these people from the former French colonies and other parts of Africa have settled in France. Lots of North Africans, Algerians, etc. And they are kind of marginalized. So they do feel disenfranchised. They do feel like the French don't treat them as like they're also French citizens. Even second generation, third generation immigrants, they still feel, like outsiders. There is this angst, there is this anger. Their economic situation is not the same. It's quite different. There are these parts, there are these suburbs in Paris, the banlieues, where these which are like ghetto like places. There is crime. There are parts of Paris where the cops can't go. Yeah, it sounds similar to what you some other things that you may have experienced. Yes, there are parts of Paris where the cops simply cannot go. There are drug lords and so much happening. There is so much crime hidden below the surface in France, in Paris. Paris is this great tourist destination. Well, there are certain parts of Paris which are definitely not tourist destinations. You can visit the Champs Elysees, the Eiffel Tower, and whatever it is, whatever else. But yeah, so that's the deal, so that's the background to what's happening now. So this one immigrant was shot. I mean, maybe he was born there. I'm not sure what his life history is. Not important. So this fellow was shot, and then there was a spontaneous, apparently, outburst of rioting all across France, which is unnatural. When you have so many incidents of rioting happening at the same time, they all start at the same time. It's clearly something that's coordinated. So who's coordinating this? Who is providing the hidden leadership? Who's providing the funding? That's the question. Now we have to understand this is not only something that's happening in France. We are seeing this all across Europe. Belgium is another issue. Belgium also has lots of Arabs and all kinds of immigrants. Germany has terrible issues. And these people, these nations have been importing boatloads and truckloads and bus loads and God knows what else loads of immigrants, typically from the Middle East, typically military age males. They call them refugees. You know what refugees look like? Refugees are helpless people. Refugees are women and children mostly. But these so called refugees who are being imported into these nations are all young military age males who come without their families, without any women and children. What's happening? It's unnatural, it's artificial. So why are nations like Germany and Italy and other nations, European nations, why are they absorbing, why are they importing so many military age uh, s- uh, immigrants. Why? And that too from only from the Middle East, from the nations that the Americans bomb and destroy, and then these nations become, the uh, originators of all these immigrants and refugees. What's happening? So we have to understand that Europe is colonized by the Americans. The true power in Western Europe, the only real power in Western Europe is the United States. They dictate terms to all the European nations. And there are several European nations that are still under permanent US military occupation. Italy is one, Germany is another. Italy and Germany. Then this begins. When did this begin? 1945, end of the Second World War. Italy was defeated, Germany was defeated. These were the Axis powers along with Japan. Japan is also under permanent US military occupation. So if you go to the maps, okay, we have maps somewhere. Let's go to maps. We have to see the map, right? On the Ask Abhijit show, the map is one of the most important things. So let's go to Italy, and let us go to, where shall we go? Shall we go to? I don't remember where I am supposed to go. Is it Palermo? Is it Cagliari, Sardinia? I don't remember. But the point is, if you know where to look, you will find US military bases all across Europe. And when it comes to Italy and Germany, these are permanent military bases, which means these nations are under permanent US military occupation. The UK is a US vassal. You know, the UK became a proper US vassal during the Tony Blair prime ministership. He was called Tony Blair was regarded as George W. Bush's poodle, pet poodle. It's a very harsh thing to say about somebody, but it's not inaccurate. So the UK is a US vassal. They do whatever the Americans tell them. Germany has no option but to do what the Americans tell them. They are under permanent US military occupation. They cannot say no to the Americans. And there are certain nations in Europe whose constitutions were either directly or indirectly written by the Americans, or written by their own people who were puppets of the Americans, because it all happened with the Americans had a veto on the writing of these constitutions. Germany is one, Italy is another. And the Japanese constitution, as we know, was entirely written in 1945 by the Americans, and not a word has changed. So France and the EU nations and the NATO nations are essentially all under the thumb or under the boots of the US. And what's really happening is the Americans are forcing these nations, that's what it looks like, to absorb military age male refugees from the war torn Middle East, from the nations that the Americans have bombed to dust. And by doing so, they are destabilizing Europe. Why would they destabilize Europe? Well, Europe in the long run is a threat to the Americans. Germany has always been a major power in the last century and a half, ever since Otto von Bismarck unified Germany. Right? Germany is a long term threat from the American perspective. If Germany rises again, it's a problem. We don't want a new Reich, Reich coming out of Germany. So why not destabilize Germany? Why not create a disaster, demographic disaster in these nations? So that's what they're trying to do. The destroying of the Nord Stream pipeline, allegedly by America, allegedly, that also serves to destabilize Germany and create a recession in Germany. And Germany has now entered a recession. So all these all these disturbances, civil war like situations, these nations, they are being forced to absorb refugees. Even the Nordic nations like Sweden, Norway, Denmark, etc., they're absorbing bucket loads, truckloads, boatloads, whatever loads of refugees, of immigrants who have no desire to assimilate. When somebody goes to start a new life in a new country, you're supposed to respect the local culture and try to assimilate into the local population, learn the language, learn the lifestyle, way of life, learn the um, customs and all that, and respect that. You have to become one of them. But these immigrants who come there have no desire to do that. They want to impose their own way of life on these European nations, and that's being done by design. So all these refugees right now, they're coming into Italy. Lots of them came to Germany. All of that is being, this is social re-engineering of these societies. I think it's all being done by the US. I mean, there's no real evidence, but all these immigrants come from the nations that the Americans have bombed to dust. It's either Iraq or Syria or Afghanistan. And sometimes there are lots of Pakistanis who come there because, Pakistan, who wants to live in Pakistan? Sadly. Yeah. So that's what's happening. And I see more of this happening now. I don't see this slowing down. I expect more of this to happen. Belgium, you had, remember the terrible airport bomb attack on the airport a few years ago. So yeah, that issue is there in Belgium as well. So all these European nations are, what's the right word? They are not doomed, but they are going towards the doom, unfortunately. All right, all right, all right, all right. Let's see. What other questions do we have? Mateo Perez says refugees is great for population growth, which helps with pension payouts for European countries. They help pay the taxes. Does Europe need population growth? And pension payouts for European countries. Well, who's from where is that? Let's say you have a new refugee who is newly minted refugee who has come to, let's say, Belgium. Now this person he has no money. He's a young guy. He has no money. He doesn't know the local language. It's going to take him, let's say, 6 months to learn the local language, and all he can do is construction work or something. And maybe there isn't even that available right now. So then the government has to support this guy. So where does the money come from? It comes from the taxpayer, right? So it actually is a burden on the host nation. And do these nations need population growth? I know the birth rates are dropping and all, but I mean it's not the right way to stabilize a population or make a population grow. The US also absorbs immigrants, but those are not refugees. They have a very strict screening procedure. Was I wrong? Yeah, after the Biden administration came into place, they've essentially opened up the southern border, the Texas and all that border, and God knows who all is coming in. They are trying to re-engineer the demographics of the US as well. So yeah, so it's a mess. It's an absolute mess. That's all I can say about this. It's an absolute mess. And there's a lesson for us to learn in India. We have to have standards. You can't just allow anybody to come into India and start claiming rights and citizenship and all that, which is kind of what's happening right now. uh, Lots, we know the situation with Bangladesh, don't we? Porous borders, open borders. We have the BSF on the borders, but we know, well, let's not open that Pandora's box of the BSF in Bengal. So I think millions of Bangladeshis have poured into India. They're all across India now, in all the major cities. I don't know how many Rohingyas were settled into India. These are the standards our governments have had in the past. And we know the situation in Manipur. Lakhs of Burmese cookies have poured into Manipur in the past few decades. They were settled by the Indian government in the 1950s, 60s, 70s. And then the last few years also, apparently, all of this has happened. So we need to raise our standards. We can't just allow anybody to come into India and start claiming citizenship. We need to learn from what's happening in Europe. All right. All right. Let's see what other questions we have. Let's see. Dikshit Balachandran says, why have so many Buddha statues been excavated from Kerala? Did Buddhism get suppressed? Indian history is thousands of years long. Buddhism, the Lord Buddha, Gautam Buddha, he lived apparently, as far as we know, 2,500 years ago. And there was an entire phase of Buddhism in India when both the dharma, that particular flavor of dharma, became the dominant brand of dharma in India. And that was, of course, engineered by the Mauryan emperors, starting from Ashoka, one of the greatest emperors of India, and one of the, yeah, we know. So there was a time in India when almost everybody practiced what we now call Buddhism. That particular flavor or brand or variety of dharma. And then different times happened and times changed, and then Adi Shankaracharya came to the fore, and he once again brought a different flavor or brand or variety of dharma to the fore. So these are natural events. These happen over time. It's not something that happened over a week's time. It took centuries. So there's no suppression. There is this entire narrative that has been created. Like I said some time ago, there are so many divisions that have been created within India, artificial divisions. They have separated Buddhism from Dharma. They've separated Jainism from Dharma. Yeah. So now Buddhism, Jainism, Hinduism are three separate religions apparently, and Sikhism also. 50 years ago, it was all part of Dharma. But now we see everything is separate. So whoever is doing this, it's the academics, the education system. They are trying to create more and more divisions within India, and they have created this narrative that Buddhism was brutally suppressed by Hindu kings, by Brahmins apparently. This is all nonsense. And I don't blame people for wondering about this and asking these questions, because this is what we have been taught. This is what our education system teaches us for like close to for about 2 decades of our life. So we absorb this every single day, every single year. Our teachers keep telling us this nonsense. Maybe they also believe this. Maybe they also went through this nonsense. So that's why this narrative has been created today, that Buddhism was suppressed brutally, which is a lie. Which is a lie. Society changes over time. Society evolves over time. And before the advent of the foreign colonizers like the Turks and the Europeans, it all happened slowly, gradually, naturally, organically over centuries. So Buddhism was never suppressed. It just went out of vogue. It just went out of vogue over time, right? And Buddhism, what was this guy's name? Alan Watts. Alan Watts said that Buddhism is Hinduism stripped down for export. So it is a truncated and more basic version of Hinduism, which is stripped down for export, because Hinduism is so complex and complicated that most outsiders can't understand it. They can't grasp it. So you have to oversimplify it so that outsiders can understand it. So that's what Buddhism is. So that's why Buddhism became very prominent later on in the east of India. So all the uh, regions of Eastern Asia that were once Hindu eventually became Buddhist. So if you look at the great temple of Angkor Wat, it was a Vishnu temple, and Buddha is regarded as an avatar of Vishnu. So it later became a Buddhist temple. It's the largest Hindu temple in the world. So it was a Hindu temple, a Shaivite temple, but eventually it was used for Buddhist practices as well, and so on. Later on, China became what we call Buddhist. Later on, Japan became Buddhist. But if you see Japanese Buddhism today, they worship all the gods that are Hindu gods. You know, they worship Kuber, they worship Lord Shiva, they worship Ganesha, they worship Saraswati, Lakshmi. All the gods and goddesses of Hinduism are part of Japanese Buddhism. So there is no real difference, first of all, between Buddhism and Hinduism. The value system is exactly the same, the morality is exactly the same, the lifestyle is exactly the same, but there are tiny differences, in the philosophy and the text and all that, and that's what these tiny 2% or 1% differences are blown out of proportion. So it is something that happened naturally and organically over centuries. Buddhism was never suppressed, and there was a time when much of India practiced what we call Buddhism. So you will find Buddha statues everywhere in the country. And unfortunately, most of the Buddha statues, especially in the northern part of India, are headless. I wonder why. Anyhow, so let's see other questions. What do we have? What do we have? Mm, Let us see. What I can't snipe says. How did the Zoroastrians of Persia get mostly wiped out of Persia, even though the religion was a one which was dominant for millennia? And how did Hinduism resist such terrible events and such a brutal faith? Uh, Persia is, if you look at the map, I'm not sure if people know the map, but let's take a look. Right, Persia is present day Iran, more or less. So historically, India was all the way up to Afghanistan, Tajikistan. When Chinggis Khan, the great Shri Chinggis Khan, invaded. He went on his Khwarazm campaign and then he entered India. At that time, the border of India was at present day border of Tajikistan and Afghanistan. And west of Afghanistan and Pakistan, present day Pakistan, temporarily, we have Iran, which is Persia. So if you can see, Iran is much smaller than the Indian subcontinent. So and it's right next to what is now called Saudi Arabia. So the Arabs were able to invade very rapidly, and they were able to defeat the Persian Empire rapidly. I forget the name of the last Sasanian king. You can look it up. Uh, so because Iran was so homogeneous and much smaller than India, and it's very flat, and it's not that difficult to invade and conquer. As you can see, it's there are very few forests and all that. There are mountains, Zagros mountains and all, but so on. So Iran essentially fell very rapidly, and the Arabs who conquered Iran were able to impose their faith, their religion on the natives within a matter of a couple of decades, 2 or 3 decades. So within 2 or 3 decades, most Iranians, most Persians had been converted to the religion of the Arabs. And some of these people, they chose not to give up their religion, so they fled to India by sea. And they were welcomed in India, and they were given shelter and refuge, and their descendants still live in India, and they still practice Zoroastrianism. And there were some Zoroastrians who in Iran who refused to give up Zoroastrianism, and they were persecuted very badly, and I suppose they're still persecuted for their faith. Uh, so that's the thing. So their religion was dominant. I think, let's say 1000 BC is when it starts. As we don't quite know when Zarathustra lived, but let's say 1000 BC. So 1000 BC to zero. So the religion was predominant in Persia for about 1600, 1700 years minimum, and then it was wiped out. And where did Zoroastrianism, where did the religion of Zarathustra emerge from? It emerged out of the ancient Vedic religion, which was the predominant religion in all of India and Persia. The Persians were descendants of ancient Indians. That's the whole thing. Uh, so that's what happened. How did Hinduism resist this? India is much more complicated, much larger, and for whatever reason, see, Hinduism is a decentralized religion. There is no pope, there is no head. It's not a pyramidal structure with top down hierarchy, that sort of thing. Hinduism is completely decentralized, and that's the reason why even if they conquered large parts of India, there was no pope, there was no structure, organized structure, there was no coordination. So Hinduism survived wherever it existed. So that is the great strength as well as a great weakness of Hinduism. Because of the great, because of the completely decentralized structure of Hinduism survived despite the entire subcontinent coming under foreign occupation for about 1,000 years. Of course, we know what happened in Afghanistan. The Afghans were all Hindus and Buddhists, and see what happened. Is there a single Buddhist or Hindu alive there today? I guess not. If there are any, there must be a handful. Uh, so that's what happened in Afghanistan. We know what happened in Kashmir, but much of India, we still have the old ancestral culture and religion that still exists, and much of it exists outside of India as well, east of India. So this decentralization that we have in Hinduism is a great strength as well as a great weakness. It allowed Hinduism to survive the 1,000 years roughly of foreign occupation in various parts of India. But it's also something that keeps the people who follow this faith, it keeps them disunited. Hinduism is so complex. There are so many different varieties and flavors of Hinduism that people see that as being different from each other, and that's what causes problems as well. So yeah, that's the deal. Okay, Tanmay says, what's your theory of what was there before the Big Bang? I personally think nothing was present before the Big Bang. As per the Vedanta says, Brahman was there. Can you expect convergent evolution? Let's talk about the Big Bang. I don't know what Vedanta says. Vedanta and the Vedas are not scientific texts. We have our own cosmology of how our ancestors imagined evolution to have happened, the evolution of the universe, and the time scales that we have in Hindu cosmology are kind of the only time scales that make sense on a cosmological scale. Billions of years, maybe trillions of years, that sort of thing. So in my theory, what was there before the Big Bang? I have no theory of what was there before the Big Bang because we have no data. All the data that we have is from after the Big Bang, the so-called Big Bang. So I have no idea whatsoever. I can't even start to speculate about what was there before the Big Bang. So yeah, listen, Vedanta is spirituality, it is religion, it is philosophy. It's the religion, philosophy, spirituality cannot mix with science. You simply cannot mix the two things. These are completely incompatible. And science also cannot talk about religion or spirituality or philosophy. So it is completely wrong for a scientist to pass opinions about stuff, about things that are not, that are beyond science. And once again, in the same way, it is wrong for people who who don't have an understanding of science to pass judgment on science based on philosophy and spirituality and religion. These things cannot mix. So, to answer your question in brief, I have absolutely no idea of what was there before the Big Bang because we don't have any data. Science is all about data. If you have data, if you have then from on the basis of data you can make a theory. But if you have no data, there can be no theory. There can only be pure speculation, which is pointless from a scientific perspective. All right, let's see some more questions. Why don't the Japanese people, Abhishek asks, why don't the Japanese people have any hatred towards the Americans due to the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki in World War II? Good question. Good question. And Japan is still under permanent US occupation. The Americans have more than 120 or more than 130 permanent military bases in Japan. Lots of it is in Okinawa, for example. You can look at the map and find the bases. Yeah, Kadena base and so on and so forth. So why don't the Japanese hate the Americans? Well, why don't why don't Indians hate the British or the Turks, the occupiers and destroyers of India? Why? It's the same question. It's because of the education system and the narratives that are created by the media and the politicians. So in Japan, you have a constitution. The constitution was written by the Americans in 1945. It was imposed upon Japan undemocratically. And that's the constitution that's still in force. Not a single word has been changed. Secondly, the Japanese education system is also something that's totally influenced by the Americans. And the Japanese are taught from day one, when they are 3 years old, or whenever you start, what, kindergarten, nursery, whatever, they are taught a pacifistic ideology in the education system. And they are made to believe that the Americans are great, benevolent, people. And Japan was wrong. I'm sure it was wrong in certain things, but whatever, right? So, so it's the education system that brainwashes people into believing things, uh, and that's essentially what it is. So, if you are taught the true history of what happened, you got to be taught the correct, accurate history. Japan did lots of terrible things in World War II, no doubt about it. But I would not agree that they were entirely, completely, 100% wrong. Their major, where they went wrong is that they lost. So the Americans won, and because the Americans won, all of their war crimes have been whitewashed away. Hiroshima and Nagasaki were nuclear tests on civilians. It's. I mean, how more can you even be possibly more barbaric and brutal? So because they won, all their war crimes have been covered up, and because the Japanese lost, all of their war crimes have been, uh, they are talked about and they are highlighted. And similarly with Germany, I'm not saying the Germans were good people. I mean, the Nazis were good people. Obviously, they were not good people. They were terrible. Hitler was a monster. Killed I don't know how many Jews and Romani gypsies, right? The Romani people. Yeah. So war is complicated. Geopolitics is complicated. There is no right. There is no real right or wrong. I mean, if yeah, I agree that the Japanese did terrible war crimes. Nanjing is a horrible example. I don't even want to think about Nanjing, what they did in Nanjing, uh, and other brutalities in Eastern Asia and all that. Uh, but so did the Americans. So does every empire. Every empire indulges in brutality. Every empire indulges in war crimes. Uh, so when it comes to the Japanese people, they are taught from childhood that the Americans did a good thing, that the Americans saved Japan from its rulers of the World War II era, and now Japan is on the right path. Japan is a pacifistic nation. They all believe in pacifism and all that. There is a fringe, a marginalized fringe in Japan that is nationalistic, but that is frowned upon very strongly. So that's the thing. So that's why the Japanese don't have any hatred towards the Americans. So that's how sheep live. Unfortunately, it's very sad. I'm not saying they should hate anyone, but they should realize that they are under foreign occupation since 1945. And they should realize that what happened in Hiroshima and Nagasaki was brutal, horrific war crimes, unforgivable war crimes. But they don't realize it because that's what the education system has done to them. And that's what actually you also see in India. That's also what you see in India as well. Yeah, anyway. Tibetan PUBG player says, your opinion on Tibetan refugees, like myself, like this person over here. What's my opinion? I think it's very sad that Tibetans have to live outside of their homeland, Tibet. I think it's very sad what's happening in Tibet. Lhasa is a city where you have, ah, well, there are more Han Chinese in Tibet than native Tibetans now, right? It's terrible. Lhasa has discotheques and I don't know what bars and casinos and worse. That's what they did to the holy city of Lhasa, and they use Tibet. They extract all the resources out of Tibet, the water and whatever else is there. So yeah, it's sad. It's terrible, and this is something that our government, India's government, allowed to happen. They allowed the Chinese to do this. They allowed the Chinese to invade and conquer Tibet in the 1950s. They actually, it was the great Mr. Nehru who was in power at the time, the Nehruvian regime, and the Chinese were starving because they were so far away from China. They were so badly overstretched. So Mr. Nehru generously provided lots of rice to the starving Chinese soldiers, and that's how the Chinese were able to conquer Tibet, thanks to the great Mr. Nehru. That's why you have Tibetans who are forced to live in exile outside of their homeland, and thankfully, Mr. Nehru also allowed the Tibetan refugees to come into India, and they were given shelter in India, which is something that we have always done in India. We have always given shelter to people who need shelter. So, so I think the only place that Tibetan culture truly survives is now India, and there are Tibetans in the West and other countries as well, but it properly survives only in India. So my opinion is that Tibetan refugees are always welcome. You are one of us. This is your home now, for now at least. Eventually, I hope that Tibet will be free again. Maybe by 2050, we can make it happen. I suppose if India rises, and then I hope that the Tibetans who live in India, who are born in India, will have the option of staying in India if they wish, or going back to Tibet, or maybe may- if Tibet is liberated, we could have the kind of arrangement that we have with Nepal. So India and Nepal are two separate nations, two separate administrations, but we have an open border, and Nepalese people do not need a passport or do not need a visa to come to India. They can just cross over, and they can work in India and live in India as long as they want. There are no restrictions, and the same thing applies to Indians as well. And Nepalese are the only people who are given the privilege of serving in the Indian army. So that's the only other nationality that is given this privilege. And we also have the Indo-Tibetan Border Police, right? ITBP. So I think when Tibet is eventually liberated, we will most likely have a similar kind of arrangement like the one we have with Nepal, an open border and no restrictions or any kind. So I think that happens eventually. So until that happens, uh, I I I think I speak on behalf of all Indians, saying that Tibetans are welcome in India. And Tibetans, they don't have this attitude of other refugees that we are special and we need special rights and privileges, and you need to the kind of like what we see in Europe, what's happening in France and other parts of Europe and all that. Refugees who come in, and then they refuse to assimilate, and they try to impose their lifestyle on the natives. The Tibetans have never done this. So that's something I really appreciate about it, and because it's the same culture actually. Tibetan culture is essentially a local, very beautiful local manifestation of Indian culture. It's the same value system, the same values, the same philosophy. It's Tibetan Buddhism, Vajrayana Buddhism, right? So it's the same culture. So there are no cultural clashes or any such thing. So yeah, so yeah, that's my opinion about Tibetan refugees. All right, let's see what else do we have. Um, One Shuranga says, "What should I choose between the commerce stream and the science stream? I will be making a decision soon. I would appreciate your opinion." Well, I don't know you. I appreciate that you asked me this question, but I do not know you, unfortunately, personally. I do not know your strengths and your weaknesses. Everybody has some strengths and some weaknesses. Everybody has. Everybody has certain aptitudes. Everybody has this unique set of characteristics. I don't know what yours are. So I cannot tell you. Unless I know you reasonably well, I cannot tell you what's right for you. So that is a decision, a choice that you have to make yourself. We need people in the commerce stream. We need people in the science stream as well. If you are in the science stream, you can either become a scientist or a teacher or a professor, or you could go into business and into engineering or something, and do stuff for the nation, or you could become an engineer, or you could start an engineering firm, or you know a defense equipment manufacturing firm, or you could go into computer science or whatever. So we need people in the science stream, but we also need entrepreneurs and business people and people who are great at commerce. So we need both of these. All of this is important. So it's up to you. You have to introspect, take some time and think about it. What are your strengths? What are your weaknesses? What are you good at? What are you not so good at? And where could you, in what capacity could you best serve society, best serve the nation, and rise to the fullest of your potential? You have to ask yourself these questions. Take some time to do that, and then I suppose I hope, and you can take the advice of your family members, your elders, your well wishers, and then make the decision yourself. So that's what I would tell you. Without knowing you, I cannot tell you which stream to take. But uh, so do this, and all the best. Okay, let's see what other questions we have. Vanshraj Bhatti says, please shed some light on the history of the Gurjars and the controversy between the Gujjars and the controversy between Rajputs and Gujjars. I don't see any controversy. This is what I keep talking about. We are so divided among ourselves. Rajput versus Gujjar and Gujjar versus Gurjar and all this. What's the point of all this nonsense? I just don't get it. Why are we constantly fighting amongst each other? Always some new controversy. It doesn't matter who's what. So historically, there was something called Gurjar Desh. Let's put it on the map. So what was Gurjar Desh? We go to Western India. There was historically a region of India which was called Rajputana, right? That region came to be known as Rajputana, which is present day Rajasthan and Gujarat. That entire region of Western India was called Rajputana. And within Rajputana, there was this region called Gurjar Desh, which is which is the Mount Abu region, Bhinnamal, all this. So northern Gujarat and southern Rajasthan, that was Gurjar Desh. And the people who lived in this region were called the Gurjars. Now, Gurjars could, some of them, it was a geographical thing, right? So even a person who belonged to one of the 32 Rajput clans who lived in Gurjar Desh would have been called a Gurjar. Now there is something called Gujjars also, which is apparently a different ethnicity. So I have this podcast, this conversation with Virendra Singh Rathore on this channel, in which we have gone into this matter about the Rajput versus Gurjar thing. So yeah, you can take a look at that. But my main point is, why do we keep fighting amongst each other? It doesn't matter what your ancestry is. You're Indian, right? You got to work together. Why do we just keep on fighting amongst each other about small little matters? That's what I mean. Your sub-national identity is more important than your national identity, and you keep fighting about based on these things. And I don't know who creates and who foments these fights, but it's a constant thing you see, and it's tiresome for me. And I just feel frustrated when I see people fighting about these inconsequential matters. It doesn't matter. We all have the same blood. We all have the same DNA, you know? So we got to stop fighting. If you take, if you do a DNA analysis of a Rajput, of a person who has Rajput ancestry, one of the 32 or 36 Rajput clans, and a person who identifies as a Gujjar or Gurjar, you will see no difference. You will see no difference whatsoever. So this is all a waste of time, completely. Mm. All right. Krishna says, will the dying superpower USA do any wars in the future? Oh yeah. When a superpower, what do you mean by superpower? Superpower is a euphemism for an empire. So the US is a superpower, it's also an empire. It's the largest empire the world has ever known. And history tells us, that's why I say study history. That's when you will understand geopolitics, if you study history properly. So history tells us that whenever an empire starts declining, it lashes out. It tries its best to not disappear. And how do you do that? When you become desperate, you start a war, you go to war. So the more desperate you are, the more likely you are to go to war. So the US is a declining superpower. Yes, there's no doubt about it. It's declining. Its influence is declining. Its power hasn't declined yet, but its influence is certainly declining. So these are not good signs for an empire. When people no longer respect you, no, they're no longer, they still are afraid of you, but they don't respect you anymore. Today, the US has become the world's laughing stock in a variety of ways. So, when a superpower or empire declines, it lashes out, it goes to war. So, I think the US will engage itself in many more wars, or start many more wars in the future. The major export, see, every nation has certain things that they export, right? And the major export of the United States is war, because it has this enormous military industrial complex that manufactures weapons, that designs and develops and manufactures weapons. And for this military industrial complex to remain profitable and viable, you need wars across the world. So you start wars, and then you sell weapons to both parties or to one party, and that's how you keep profiting. So uh, so the US actually it profits from war. So I think they will excuse me, they will either engineer more wars, or they may themselves get involved in wars in the future. Shaheen says, what are the major factors and causes of the decline of Hinduism in Southeast Asia? Now, the island of Bali and some other pockets of the Cham Hindus left in South Vietnam and Cambodia. Apart from that, there is no more Hinduism in Southeast Asia. The major cause of the decline of Hinduism in Eastern Asia was the decline of India itself. See, Hinduism, the birthplace of Dharma, and Hinduism, Buddhism, all of that, the birthplace is India, the Indian subcontinent, right? And from the Indian subcontinent, see, here's the Indian subcontinent. You can see where it is. It's at the center of Asia. It has this God gifted position in the center of the Indian Ocean region. And Hinduism and Indian culture and Dharma were exported out of India in various directions, starting from the time of Emperor Ashok. Then later, Emperor Kanishka also did a lot of this. So, Emperor Ashok uh, focused on the West to a significant extent. He exported, Indian culture all the way to Greece, and also to Suvarna Bhumi and Lanka and all that. Suvarna Bhumi was essentially today's Thailand, but it was Kanishka, Emperor Kanishka, who came about, I don't know, 4 or 5 centuries later, roughly. Look it up. So it was Kanishka who exported Dharma eastwards into China, and all the way eventually it went into Japan. So the epicenter, the heartland of Dharma, of Hinduism, was the Indian subcontinent. And when it comes to Southeast Asia, Thailand, Vietnam, Cambodia, Laos, all these places, Hinduism was exported to these regions by the great merchants of Kalinga. This started at least 3,000 years before today. Kalinga is totally forgotten today when it comes to the its great influence, the enormous influence it has had, not only on India culturally, but on much of the world culturally, especially Eastern Asia. Kalinga is today's Orissa. When we talk about Utkal, Utkal is Uttara Kalinga. So all of that, right? So the heartland of Hinduism and Dharma overall is the Indian subcontinent, and all of Southeast Asia, Eastern Asia, it came under Indian influence. Whether it is Indonesia, all of Indonesia was Hindu. All of Thailand, Cambodia, the Southeast Asian regions, all of that was Hindu. China and Japan and Korea and all were Buddhist nominally, but there is a lot of Hindu influence there also. So all of this was made possible because of the predominance and preeminence of India culturally and economically and militarily. But the Indian culture was never exported through military means. It was always done uh, through cultural diffusion, primarily done by traders and merchants. So that's how it was. So once India itself declined in the past 1,000 years, because India came under foreign occupation, starting with the Turks and then the Europeans. Once India started declining, the the influence started across the rest of Asia also started declining. So that's why Hinduism declined in Southeast Asia. There are some pockets left. Where is Bali? Bali is here. Here it is. You see Bali? This here is Bali, this island here. And there are some Hindus, the charm Hindus in Vietnam, Cambodia, etc. So yeah, that's what happened. So it was the decline of India that led to the decline of Indian influence and culture in much of Asia. So Indonesia eventually became Islamic. So did Malaysia, and so on. So these nations then eventually went their own way, and that's what happened. So it was the decline of India that caused this. All right, let's see some other questions. Um, okay, Umar says, dear Abhijit, thank you, sir. Would you support a confederation between India, Pakistan, Bangladesh? What are the pros and cons of each nation? Umar Nizam from Dhaka, Bangladesh, host of the Book Cafe podcast. Um, it's a good question. I would not support a confederation, especially with Pakistan. See, the reason for this is the people of Pakistan are they are taught to hate India. It's something that's taught from the day they are born. They have this visceral. Most, I'm not saying all of the Pakistanis. I'm sure there are Pakistanis who don't hate India as well. But overall, the majoritarian position is that India is the number one enemy. There is a visceral, deep-rooted hatred for India. And Pakistan, we know what's happened over the past 3 4 decades, especially after Ziaul Haq came to power. Pakistan has become the world's like I said, every nation has a major export. The US exports war, Pakistan exports terrorism. Pakistan is the world's terrorism epicenter, terror central. You simply cannot have a confederation with open borders, let's say, with a nation like that. We in India don't want to have anything to do with Pakistan. Pakistan is an issue that's left over from history. The British created Pakistan. They divided the Indian subcontinent into all these separate nations. So it's a temporary situation. Eventually Pakistan will disintegrate. uh, it's being propped up by foreign powers. Just recently, I think yesterday, they got a new IMF bailout, $3 billion or whatever. So they will not allow Pakistan to fail, because they need Pakistan as a counterbalance to India. They need it to keep India off balance. So Pakistan is a hostile nation. Its entire raison d'être, its reason for existing, is to counterbalance India and to keep India off balance and to keep needling and pricking and bleeding India. You can't have a confederation between India and Pakistan. When it comes to Bangladesh, eventually, I think it will happen. Uh, Once again, the issue is that there are lots of Bangladeshis also. I'm not saying all Bangladeshis. There are lots of wonderful Bangladeshis who see India as well. We are the same eventually, aren't we? Bangladesh was part of Bengal, Bangladesh, from the Mahabharata times. So we all are the same people. But once again, there is this issue. There are some Bangladeshis, certain sections of Bangladeshi society, who have a great hatred for India, and who see more of a common cause with Pakistan. So there's this issue as well. These issues will all overall be resolved with time. It won't happen immediately. I think India and Bangladesh are already cooperating to a very significant extent. Uh, and that's why the Americans want regime change in Bangladesh. They want to, uh, you know, they want to depose Sheikh Hasina. The Americans want regime change in Bangladesh, and they are, we can see signs and symptoms of that happening. So India and Bangladesh already have excellent relations, and the relations will only improve over time. And eventually, I have no doubt that the subcontinent overall entirely will reunify, but it will take maybe 100 years. It won't happen, as far as I can see, during my lifetime or our lifetimes. But let's say by 2100 or 2150, things may be very different. Eventually, the subcontinent will reunify and reunite. That's gonna happen. So I think it's not something we should rush into or try to engineer, because it will create problems which we don't want. I think the situation that we have between India and Bangladesh is already very good. We have Indians who there are Indians who study in Bangladesh, medical college and all that, and there are Bangladeshi people who come to India for studies as well, and tourism is there, lots of stuff is there. So when it comes to India and Bangladesh, I think the situation is great. It will only keep on improving. There are certain issues that obviously my viewers will be talking about, that there is illegal immigration and all. Okay, eventually it will all be resolved, because it will be resolved. But Pakistan is a different issue. So Pakistan will have to disintegrate first, which it will naturally do. There are too many centrifugal forces within Pakistan that are tearing it apart. It's being held together artificially by the West, but it will eventually break up. I think sooner rather than later, and then it will eventually naturally evolve into a different kind of a bunch of nations, and eventually we will be able to reintegrate it into India. So pros and cons for each nation. The con when it comes to Pakistan is terrorism and hatred for India. So that's a huge con. When it comes to Bangladesh or India, the cons are less, pros are more. Eventually, so I think India and Bangladesh could have a confederation much before anything like that could happen with Pakistan. All right. Um, Authentic historical books about Napoleon Bonaparte to read. Listen, I am very bad with book recommendations because I've read so many books I can't remember the names. They are all the knowledge, all the information, all the data that I've absorbed over time. It eventually amalgamates, and I don't have any specific book recommendation to give. What I would suggest is go to Amazon or Flipkart or whatever, your favorite online retailer. Search for Napoleon in the book section and see which book has the highest number of 4+ star ratings. That would be a good place to start, right? I have a book or two somewhere here, but I'll not go into that right now. So there are lots of good books about Napoleon. So yeah, do that. Go to Amazon or Flipkart or wherever. See the best books. Lots of 4-star plus reviews, and that will be a good place to start. And it's never enough to read one book. You got to read more, at least like 3-4 books to have a reasonably well-rounded understanding of a subject. um, what do we have? What else do we have? Naiba, whatever the name is, I can what are the chances of Modi winning the next election? I think Modi is still in pole position to win the next election. Obviously there are foreign forces that don't want this to happen, primarily in the West. But I think I would say that the government should not become complacent, uh, like kind of the way the Vajpayee government became complacent a little bit, one would say, with reasonable accuracy. In 2004, they were very confident they would win, and they ended up losing. So that sort of complacency should never creep in. There are lots of challenges, lots of issues. You see what's happening in Manipur. I would say that it's being fomented by outside external forces to keep India off balance. So there are going to be these challenges. I have said this, that the breaking India forces will intensify in their actions in the run up to the 24 elections. They will try their best to make the prime minister look bad and weak. And what's happening in Manipur is a symptom of that. They want to make the government look weak, right? So I think Mr. Modi should win the next election, and I hope he wins. But I hope that the government doesn't become too complacent. They should not take anything for granted. That's what I would say. All right. What else do we have? What else? What else? What else? M. Zach says, do you think Bose could have persuaded Jinnah away from partition if he was in India in the 1940s? So there's no persuading somebody. Jinnah, the who really crafted and implemented the partition of India? It wasn't Jinnah. It was the British. They used Jinnah as an excuse. They used him as a puppet, as a prop. They always wanted to partition India. That's always been their policy of the Anglo-Saxon Empire. Before you leave a colony, you break it into pieces, right? So they always wanted to partition India. So Jinnah was simply an excuse. He was in London. He was in England for a decade. He came back to India in the 1930s with a new zeal and a new objective. So where did it come from? They say that he read Mustafa Kemal Ataturk's biography written by H.C. Armstrong, and that could be a cause. That could be a factor which gave him new zeal and gave him the idea of breaking India and creating a Pakistan out of it. But overall, it was the British who did this. So it was not about persuading. If somebody would have persuaded Jinnah to give this up, they would have found somebody else to be the leader. The British. They would have found somebody else to be the leader of the Pakistan movement. So it is the country was not partitioned because of one man, Jinnah. He was simply the figurehead of the partition thing. The British partitioned India. So if you wanted to stop the partition of India, you had to defeat the British. So we had an opportunity in 1946 when we had the Indian naval rebellion against the British. And Mr. Gandhi and Mr. Patel jinxed it. They nixed it in the bud. They made promises. They first of all demoralized the Indian naval sailors and officers, and they made false promises which were immediately broken. So, had the rebellion of 1946 succeeded, it would have succeeded had the Indian army come to know about it. So, it was a matter of time before it happened. So, they had to act very fast and persuade the rebels, the naval rebels, to give up, to abandon the rebellion. So, in 1946, if that rebellion had succeeded, India would have never been partitioned because we would have, acquired freedom through force, through strength, instead of being given freedom on British terms on a platter. And what happened was a transfer of power from one set of crooks to another set of crooks. So it was not about persuading Jinnah. If you had persuaded Jinnah, do you think partition would not have happened? What nonsense. They would have swept Jinnah aside and found themselves a new figurehead for the partition movement. Uh, so yeah, that's the thing. So for partition to not happen, either the 1946 rebellion should have succeeded, or Bose, or the other situation scenario is that Bose would have succeeded in conquering India from the east, which did not happen. So yeah, that's the thing. Sabana says, "What do you think about the Titan submersible?" So yeah, that disaster. So which year did the Titanic sink? Somewhere in the 1910s, something like that. Um, and I think more than 1,000 people died in that. And then in 2023, I don't know, six more people died in the same location, roughly. So that was the Titan, not the Titanic, the submersible, the submarine. So what do I think? I think it was a disaster. Uh, it was not a well engineered submersible. It had lots of structural issues. First of all, its hull was made of fiberglass. You want something stronger than fiberglass when you have a submersible. Every submarine, based on the material it's made of and the various engineering characteristics, every submarine has something called a crush depth. It's the depth beyond at which the submarine implodes because of the pressure of the ocean, of the water. So every submarine has a crush depth, and every submarine has an operating depth below which you should not go. It can still go below that, but eventually you will reach crush depth, at which point the submarine simply implodes because it can no longer withstand the pressure of the ocean. And so, if you want to construct a submarine that can do really deep dives, then you need to have sufficiently strong material for the hull and sufficiently good engineering. And clearly, this Titan submersible was deficient in both the engineering as well as the strength of the hull. And I think they had done a lot of cost cutting and cutting corners and all that. The guy, the CEO or the owner of the company, he refused to hire competent engineers because they were white. Apparently, I mean, what nonsense! Doesn't make any sense, but that's what he did, and used very basic equipment like I don't know what, a gaming controller to control the submersible and all that. So there was a lot of cost cutting, a lot of cutting corners, a lot of shortcuts were taken, and yeah, eventually, we know what happened. It imploded. So yeah, it was an avoidable tragedy, but well, that's what it is. It's a lesson for future people, future engineers to learn. Okay, what else? Mm, Pawan Gaonkar says you use the word greatest empire the world has ever witnessed for America. Whom does this empire serve? Surely it does not serve all parts of its empire. No, it serves the people who control the empire. An empire doesn't serve everybody. Let's take the example of the Roman Empire. The Roman Empire controlled the entire Mediterranean region. Let's go to the map. So, if we look at the Roman Empire, initially its capital was Rome, and it controlled much of Europe. So, the whole of the whole of Iberia, which is today's Spain, they had conquered the British Isles. They had conquered Gaul, which is France, much of Germany, all the way east up to Judea, which is present day Israel, Lebanon, Syria, all that, much of present day Turkey. Egypt they had conquered, and northern Africa as well. All right. So, did the Roman Empire serve all the people who lived in this region? No, it did not. Excuse me. It exploited these conquered territories for resources, and the purpose was to enrich Rome itself. So the people of Rome, they had very high standards of living, good quality of life, but even within Rome, it was only the elites, you know, who actually enjoyed the fruits of the empire. Truly. So an empire does not serve everybody, all its subjects. It only serves the elites, the masters, the ones who are truly in power in the empire. Let's talk about the British Empire. Did it serve India? It exploited India. It destroyed India totally. Did it serve Mesopotamia? No, it did not. The British Empire, did it serve Africa? Much of Africa was conquered by the British Empire. It did not. So, empires typically are exploitative in nature. Indian empires were different because we never really, uh, you know, colonized. We had empires in India. We had the Mauryan Empire, the Kushan Empire, the Gupta Empire, the Karkota Empire, the Chola Empire, the Maratha Empire, etc. The Cholas conquered the entirety of Southeast Asia all the way to the Philippines. But it was not colonization, it was simply conquest, and then there were these nations, these kingdoms were allowed to rule as vassals. So there was no extraction of wealth when it came to Indian empires. But when it comes to other empires, Western empires, whether it was the Roman Empire or the British Empire or the American Empire, it's extraction of wealth. How does the US extract wealth, you will ask? They do it through the financial system, the US dollar. They take debt. The US debt to GDP ratio is ridiculous. They have trillions of dollars of debt, which they will never repay. If they are asked to repay the debt, they will simply print dollars because all the debt is in US dollars, and the Americans can print dollars anytime they want. So essentially they will only repay the debt in paper money. So so America doesn't serve the world, it serves itself. And even within the US, it serves whoever really runs the country, clearly not the president. So yeah, that's the deal. um okay. Auspicious Doomsday says, what could be the Russian plan if it wants to restore its former superpower position? How could Russia engineer problems with the US, and how will US vassals suffer? Well, that's a very wide ranging, expansive question you've asked, but it's a good question. So, obviously, Russia would like to restore its former superpower position. And Russia has great advantages. It has an enormous territory, right? It looks enormous on this map, but it's quite large for sure. Uh, so Russia is essentially an autarky. It is self-sufficient in all the basic needs that a nation would have. Agriculture, Russia is self-sufficient. Minerals, Russia is self-sufficient. Oil and gas, Russia has everything it needs. All the rare earth resources, whatever you need, for a fully industrialized nation, all the resources are available within Russia itself. So it is an autarky. It is not dependent on anybody else. It does not depend on other nations for oil or gas or metals or coal or anything, or agriculture, anything at all. So that's the great advantage Russia has. And eventually they would want to Well, if it wants to become a superpower again, it has to become a great economy again. It already has a huge military and the world's largest arsenal of nuclear weapons. How could Russia engineer problems for the US? Well, it could expand its footprint in Europe for starters. So Ukraine, it could eventually overtake. Maybe the former Warsaw Pact nations, the Eastern European nations, eventually could come under Russian sway if they are able to engineer that. And then once that happens, other nations would, if they are able to bring nations out of the US orbit, that would cause a great decline in the US prestige and credibility, which is something that would engineer problems with the US throughout the world. And when it comes to Africa, also, Russia provides security and safety to various African regimes through the Wagner forces, for instance, and all that. And if Russia, as part of BRICS, could, you know, succeed in creating a new BRICS currency and creating a separate world order, a separate economic and financial order, that could also create huge problems for the US. So it's something that will happen over time. They will certainly try to do this, and the Americans will try their best to resist this. So that's a tug of war we are witnessing in real time right now in the 2020s. And by the time 2030 comes around, I think the world could be a very different place from what it is right now. Um, this is a question I get a lot. What do I think about Andrew Tate? I don't know much about him. I have not. Uh, I think lots of people are very greatly influenced by him for some reason. I think he had a lot of videos on the internet and all that. I have not seen a single video of his. I don't really know what he stands for. I don't know why he is so famous and popular and all that. And there are lots of controversies around him. He was arrested, I suppose, in Romania. I'm not sure if he's still under arrest. He and his brother. So I don't know. I really haven't spent any time trying to research this gentleman and understand his life history and why he's so famous. I've never been interested, so I don't know. It's a question I get all the time. So let me answer this right now. I don't know much about Andrew Tate. Okay, what else? Atharva Bajpayee says, which country is a bigger threat to India in the long run, China or the US? uh, well, you know, geographically, China is next door. They have conquered Tibet in the 1950s, and now we have a common border with China. A very long, extensive border, which is completely undemarcated. The Chinese have refused to demarcate the border. They want to keep this issue open so that they can keep India off balance. They can keep on needling India, keep on pricking and pushing India, salami slicing, all that stuff. So that's a huge issue for India. And for India to resolve the China issue, we will have to resolve the Tibet issue, which means Tibet needs to be free again. Tibet needs to be liberated from the Chinese. And it's nowhere near happening right now. We are not in a position to do that right now. Maybe in the next 20 years, we may be in a position to perhaps do something about it. So China is a long term threat for us. China is a long term threat, significant, real and present danger for India. China, and why is China a threat? It's because India is the only nation in Asia that can pose a challenge to China. India is the only nation in Asia that can, you know, possibly in the long run compete with China and surpass China. Historically, India has always been the world's largest economy until the 1700s. And China was always number two, historically. Look up Angus Madison's research. So that's the potential that India has. That's been India's historic rightful position at the top of the global economic chain, the world's largest economy. So China knows India's potential. And they've grabbed a lot of territory and all that. Right now, they've become so large, inflated. But India has this potential. So that's why the Chinese fear India. They fear India. And that's why China is a huge threat. Right now, China is way more powerful. Their economy is about, what's India's economic GDP right now? $3.7 trillion or something. China is what, 16, 17, something around that. So it's way larger. And because of that, it has a much more powerful military, but it's tied up in various places because they have started conflicts with everybody. So China is a real and present threat for India in the long run. The us the us also now sees India as a long term threat, a long term competitor, a long term rival. India is emerging. India is finally getting its act together. In the Indian economy is finally growing, and it's projected to keep growing for the next 20 years at least. So eventually, India could become the next China. That's a possibility. It's a possibility that the Americans will not discount. So that's why they see India as a long term rival. And they will do their best to not allow this to happen. How do you do it? You keep India under pressure by creating issues within India. You can start, like what's happening in Manipur right now. That's an example. What happened when Donald Trump visited India? What happened at the time? I think we can all remember what was going on in India at the time. They can create a color revolution kind of situation. That's something they have perfected over time. They can destabilize India's neighborhood. We know what's happening in Nepal, large scale Christian conversions. We know what's happening in other parts of the subcontinent, and so on. So the US is also a huge threat for India. They don't want India to rise. They want India to be off balance. They want India to be only sufficiently strong enough to counterbalance China, but not more than that. So they will cooperate with India in certain ways, but they will also work against India in a lot of ways. They will keep demonizing India about that fake bogey of human rights and democracy and all that, which the Americans pull out anytime they need to pressurize a nation. So they will keep on doing that. So I think both nations are a threat to India in the long run. I have nothing against either nation actually. I would like to see both nations do well, but facts are facts. They both see India as a rival, and they will do their best. The Chinese would like India to eventually break up into pieces, and so would the Americans actually. And they indulge in what they call subnational diplomacy. You know, and they fund various anti-India forces. The Americans do, the Chinese also do that. So it's an issue. It's a huge problem for India, and the only solution for India is to keep rising, and rise over the next 20 years. Do not get involved in any major military conflict. Keep rising, grow the economy, and once the economy is at a certain place, like let's say around $10 trillion, then we will be able to resist lots of these external forces, and then we'll be able to solve internal problems which we are not able to solve right now. So that's the situation India is in. I think both nations are long term adversaries actually for India. So we try our best to maintain good relations. Our prime minister very recently was in the US, and he was given a very good welcome, very warm welcome. And both nations, both leaders, Mr. Modi and Mr. Biden, spoke about what India and America have in common: democracy and all those shared values or whatever it is, and all that. This is the age of AI, America and India, all that. So India will try its best to cooperate with the US and also with China in whatever way we can. But overall, we have to be realistic that both nations see India as an adversary in the long run. So India is going to have to walk the tightrope, do the tightrope walking act, and hopefully we do it right. For which we will need the right leadership. So if India votes the wrong leadership into power, it's game over essentially. Okay. Um, what else? Rakshasi Raj He Aaj says, does Sanatan Dharma support feminism? Feminists talk about equal rights, but not about taking responsibility. Dharma teaches about performing duties, and doesn't feminism lead to the emasculation of men? Feminism is a foreign concept. It's a newfangled concept that came out of the West. It emerged out of the West because of the defects and deficiencies and horrors of Western society. Women were horribly downtrodden in the West. So feminism, it's a whole history. I'll not go into the details, but it first, I think, emerged out of the US. So over there in Western society, because of the cultural values and all that, the Catholic Christian values or whatever, because of that, women were second class citizens. They were very badly downtrodden. They had no rights until the mid 20th century. Women did not have the the right to vote in many nations in Europe. I think until the 1990s, I think there were certain parts of Switzerland where women could not vote. They did not have the right to vote. So that's the kind of society the West is. So that's why feminism came out of necessity. It arose out of necessity. Women had to do something about this. to get the same rights as men. So then feminism emerged. That's the emergence of feminism, and then feminism kind of became the dominant ideology. And now it what this the comment says over here, the emasculation of men. It's true. So now, what's happening is that this feminism is merged with the woke ideology and all that. And what we are seeing now in the West is that men are becoming feminine and women are becoming masculine. And it is men who are now the oppressed gender. That's the weirdness that's happening in the West. When it comes to Sanatan Dharma, there is no concept of feminism and there is no concept of equal rights. It's about dif- I mean, in Dharma, we don't really talk about rights, we talk about responsibilities, but Dharma has always treated women extraordinarily well. Women actually have a more exalted status than men in many ways. So, you know we have to understand that this concept of equality is wrong. There is no equality in nature, there is no equality anywhere in the world, right? You cannot equate a man with a woman. These two genders play different roles. And now they'll say, why are you talking about gender roles? Because that's the truth. That's always been the fact in human history. Thousands of years, tens of thousands of years, hundreds of thousands of years of human evolution, males and females played different roles. Now we have technology, and the human male brawn and muscle power is not really required. I agree. So today, gender roles and all that are naturally changing. Even in India, we have the induction of women into the armed forces. Yeah. So that's just how things are changing, and a lot of it is because of Western influence. But yes, feminism leads to the emasculation of men. And today, the thing is, in the Indian education system, especially in colleges and universities, they teach what do they call gender studies or whatever it is, and feminism is taught. So girls are made to feel like they have been oppressed for thousands of years throughout history. That was true in the West, but not in the East. But that's what they're taught. So then this concept of feminism also has emerged in India, and women want to be like the way the Western women are, the stronger, the more dominant gender and all that. So it's a mess. I hope too much of this doesn't get introduced into India. The education system is mainly to blame, and also the entertainment industry. So uh so when it comes to Sanatan Dharma, there was never any oppression of women, and women actually had a very highly respected and rather exalted position in society. Okay. um Rahul says, I see a massive amount of hatred, prejudice, ridicule from Europeans and Americans about India. Plenty of dehumanization. Why do they have a track record of being so shockingly hateful? See, Europe has always been racist. America is nothing but an outcome and a new colony of Europe, settler colonization. And all of this goes back to the Catholic Church, the Pope. So when Cristoforo Colombo discovered this new land, he thought it was India, it was actually the Americas. um, the Pope gave the right um, to the explorers, excuse me, to claim any territory as their own as long as it did not have Christians. So if so, the this thing was created that if a society is not a Christian society, it is subhuman, it is inferior, and it can be enslaved and destroyed. And that's what actually happened, and that's what colonialism was. Um, so that's something that's part of their culture, it's part of their history. The Europeans and the Americans are nothing but European settlers who settled down in this new continent after destroying the natives. This horrific genocide of the Native Americans happened. At least 50 to 100 million individuals, people, innocent people, were killed by the Europeans. So now what we see is that the West is no longer the predominant force in the world. It is still the richest block, so to say, in the world, the so-called first world, the global north, so to say. They are still the richest, but now the East is emerging. especially China and India. They don't see Russia as part of the West. So Russia itself now is part of the East. So the East is emerging. And the three major poles are RIC, Russia, India, China. And obviously, when a dominant power sees new powers emerging, they are jealous and resentful. And that's why they will try to demoralize these new emerging powers by making them feel inferior, which is why you see all this ridicule, this prejudice, this hatred, and the dehumanization. So it's actually a symptom when it comes to India of India's emergence as a new power in the world, as a new economy, a major economy, and a major geopolitical force, which has happened very rapidly after the Ukraine war. So because India is now emerging, and India is no longer, uh, you know, subsidiary or uh, dominated by the West. That's why you are seeing this jealousy and this hatred and this prejudice and this ridicule and the dehumanization, which is a symptom of their helplessness in the face of India's uh, rise. India is beginning to rise now. India is essentially where the Chinese were in the late 1980s, early 1990s. That's where India is right now. It's just early days. India has at least 2 decades of very hard, intense work in front of it for India to be where China is today, at least 20 years. So Indians should not get complacent that we are rising, we are now Vishwaguru, we are superpower. No, no, no. We are beginning to learn how to walk. Remember that. And the world notices this. The world now notices that India is becoming more confident and India is actually now rising. So that's why they don't like it. And that's why we see this attitude. And this entire thing of racial hatred, racism, all that, it's part of European culture. It's part of the European DNA. So not surprising to see all this. Aparna says, "What's your analysis of the Wagner Group revolt in Russia? What does it tell about Russia's internal affairs?" I have an entire video about this, which came out 2 3 days ago. Take a look at that. But if you want me to answer right now in brief, it was a psychological operation. It was not a coup at all. It was a redeployment in broad daylight, essentially, of the Wagner forces from Ukraine to Belarus. Let's take a look at the map. So let's go to Ukraine. We know where it is. So the Wagner forces were in the Donbas region, which is uh, eastern Ukraine, right? And they fought the Battle of Bakhmut, which is here, which is now called Artemovsk. So they fought the Battle of Bakhmut, and it lasted 224 days, and eventually, after 224 days, the Wagner forces were able to win the city of Bakhmut at the cost of an enormous amount of Ukrainian lives and material. So now Wagner wanted to. So now the Russians wanted to redeploy Wagner from the Donbas region into Belarus. So recently, Belarus essentially is a Russian ally. You would not be mistaken to call it a Russian vassal state. All right. And recently, just a month or so ago, in the past month or two, Russia has transferred tactical nuclear weapons to Belarus territory. So Belarus now hosts on its territory tactical nuclear weapons that belong to Russia. So you can see the close interconnectedness that Russia and Belarus have. Belarus is right north, absolutely north of Ukraine. And the Belarus border is about 100 kilometers or so, maybe less, from the Ukrainian capital of Kiev. So what the Russians wanted to do was they wanted to redeploy the Wagner forces that had done their job in successfully in the Donbas region. They wanted to redeploy them in Belarus all the way. So they did this in broad daylight by creating an artificial fake coup. So, Yevgeny Prigozhin, the boss of Wagner, has done this in the past. In the beginning of May this year, he claimed that Wagner was retreating and withdrawing from Bakhmut because the Russian military under Sergei Shoigu and the other guy, Gerasimov, they were starving Wagner of ammunition. So he said we are withdrawing, but they did not withdraw and they won the battle. So it was a psychological operation. They fooled the West and Europe and the world into believing that there was dissent within Russia, within the Russian forces, and there was a rebellion, and that Putin had apparently lost control of what was happening. But that was not the case. So now this was an even bigger psychological operation, an even bigger deception that Wagner did. They pretended to start a coup, right? And they marched towards Moscow. They took the city of Rostov on Don. Yeah, they captured the city. Then they marched northwards towards Moscow. They were 200 kilometers from Moscow. And then they said, no, we are no longer we are abandoning the coup. And then they very rapidly deployed westwards and entered Belarus. And right now, Yevgeny Prigozhin is in essentially apparently in Minsk, and Wagner forces are in Belarus. So within 24 hours, the coup was over, and Wagner had been redeployed from Bakhmut, from the Donbas region, all the way into Belarus, with the Western media and the Western governments cheering for them. So that's what happened in broad daylight, in full view of the world. This is what happened. So it was a psychological operation, and what it also did is that it kind of exposed the traitors within Russia, the ones who supported the coup, the fake coup. But the deal is, this was not a coup. Anybody who has seriously studied how a coup is executed will know it's not a coup. Study the book Coup d'etat by Edward Luttwak. That's the book you need to study if you want to understand how to execute a coup, which I would not recommend executing a coup, but I would recommend studying the book. So this was a fake coup, and it has actually made Vladimir Putin stronger and exposed his enemies. That's what it did. Okay. What else do we have? Lots of questions. Prathamesh says, predict analyze the events for the next 15 days. I cannot. I have no idea what's going to happen tomorrow or the next 15 days. That's not what I do. I am not. There are certain so-called geopolitical experts who say every one of my predictions comes right. There are some such people. You know, they have created a name for themselves by claiming that they always make accurate predictions. You know, no geopolitical analyst can make 100% accurate predictions. You will always get something wrong. So I am not in the business of predicting events. I analyze what's happening, and I can give possible scenarios of what could happen, but I cannot predict what's actually going to happen. I can always get things wrong. I think everybody gets things wrong. I don't think it was fake, sir. All right, amnesia. It's up to you to believe what you want to believe. Entirely your choice. So so if this was not a fake coup, then what was the outcome of the coup? So Prigozhin went through Russian territory for hundreds of kilometers. He was not stopped. He was not arrested when he could have been arrested. The He was given unimpeded access, on the M4 highway for hundreds of kilometers. He was allowed to go into Belarus. And what was the outcome of the coup if you don't think it was fake? If it was a real coup, Putin would have crushed them. He has the military power to crush any rebellion. He chose not to. Anyway, it's up to you what to believe. I can give you my analysis, and you can make your own decisions and understanding based on that. All right, that's fine. I respect your opinion. I respect your right to have a different opinion based on your understanding of how things have gone. Romay Raj Singh says, how far behind are we in jet engine technology? Will we ever be able to pull it off? See, the one stumbling block when it comes to jet engines, so we have to understand how jet engines work. There are various different kinds of jet engines. Let's talk about the standard turbofan engine that we have, that is used in fighter aircraft. So inside a jet engine, what happens is you suck in air from outside, you mix it with fuel, you ignite it, and that ignition is essentially results in an explosion that you control, and that expels gases out from the outlet behind the jet engine, and that's what impels that is what provides the impulse that powers the aircraft, the jet. So that's what propels the aircraft forward. So you suck in air from ahead, from let's say this is a jet engine. This is the inlet. So air will be sucked in from here, and inside there will be an ignition. It will be mixed with the jet fuel. It will be ignited, and there's a whole there are the turbine blades and all that, which will spin, and the uh, exhaust will be ejected from behind, and that's what propels the uh, jet engine in the aircraft forward. So inside the engine, you have incredibly high temperatures. 1500, 2000 degrees Celsius. I'm not sure exactly what the temperature is. You can look it up if you want. But we have extremely high temperatures. Temperatures beyond, and the temperatures are higher than the melting point of iron and steel and many metals. So then the question is, if the temperatures are so high for a jet engine to have a certain amount of thrust, which you need, thrust is measured in kilonewtons when it comes to jet engines, right? Uh, so if you want a certain amount of thrust, you will need a certain temperature inside the jet engine, and this temperature is higher than the melting point of your standard metals like steel and all that. So then, of what material do you make your turbine blades? Your turbine blades have to be able to withstand those temperatures for a sustained amount of time, and not only for one mission, but for a few hundred missions. For, let's say, at least 100 missions. So, what material will you make that turbine blade out of? So that is the crux. That's where we are behind. We have not invested in material science. So when it comes to, let's say, the General Electric F whatever engine it is, the turbine blade is made out of a single crystal of a certain metallic alloy. A single crystal. You don't take molten metallic alloy and you cast it and you make turbine blades out of it. You don't do that. You grow the entire turbine blade out of a single crystal of that metallic alloy, and that is a very specialized specific technology. India has not been able to develop it thus far because it takes a lot of time to develop it, lots of trial and error. You have to try and fail several hundred times to get it right. So we don't have the infrastructure, we don't have the researchers. I think we have a jet engine uh, research establishment somewhere in Bangalore or something. I'm not sure. They have been trying to develop the what is it called, the Kaveri engine, and the Kaveri engine gives a certain amount of thrust which is insufficient for what we need. I think the thrust it gives is about 50, 60, maybe 70 kilonewtons. I don't think it's up to 70. So it's enough to power drones and all that, but not enough to power a fighter jet. So I think the Tejas fighter jet needs at least 110, 120 kilonewtons of thrust, if I am not mistaken. If I'm not mistaken, I don't have the numbers in front of me right now, but yeah. So for that, you need an engine which can generate a very high temperature, higher than what it is. But we don't have the uh, ability to create turbine blades that can withstand those temperatures. So the crucial technology that we are missing is the turbine blade technology. How to build turbine blades that can withstand those incredibly high temperatures. So that's done by growing the entire blade out of a single crystal of a specific metallic alloy which contains nickel and certain other metals, if I am not mistaken. And that's what we have not been able to do because we have not invested in material science research. That's why we are far behind. Eventually, we'll be able to do it. I'm not sure what the status is right now. Maybe it's classified. Maybe it's secret. We don't reveal this information to the public. So I am not sure where we are in the development of an indigenous jet engine. Right now, we have signed a memorandum of agreement with General Electric, I think, of the US, in which they will transfer a certain amount of jet engine technology to India, and these engines will be built in India, which is a good start. And some people say it's about 80% of the technology which will be transferred. We That remains to be seen. It's just a memorandum of understanding that's been signed thus far. So we will have to see how much technology we actually get, but we will certainly not be given the crucial technology, the single crystal turbine blade technology. That is something we will have to find a way to develop on our own. So that's the issue. We will eventually be able to pull it off. It will take time, maybe 10 years, maybe 20 years. You know, Optimistically, maybe less, but realistically, maybe 10, 20 years. Okay, what else do we have? We have so many, many, many questions. Elliot Anderson says, when will India have its own Google, Facebook, YouTube, Instagram that is global and animation, gaming, K-pop like industries? Um, you know, There is only so much the government can do. When it comes to Google, Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, animation, whatever, these are all private industry, private companies. The US government has nothing to do with this. You can't expect the government to go and solve every problem the country has. The private sector needs to step in. So to develop something like Google or Facebook or YouTube, you need to take risks, right? It takes a lot of money to build such a company. And we have very rich people in India. But unfortunately, I think the culture of taking big risks still isn't there because of I mean, for obvious reasons. India for the past 1000 years has been under foreign occupation. People have been artificially impoverished by the British. There is so much poverty in India even today, which is all something that stems back to the British times when the British disenfranchised the Indian people and stole all the land and redistributed it to their minions. So today, that's an issue. So Indians became very risk averse in the past 200-300 years, maybe 1,000 years. So that attitude needs to change. It will take time, right? So Indian business people, they want to invest their money in ventures that have lower risk rather than high risk ventures, and that's why India is not, you know, coming up with these, uh, Googles and Facebooks and all that. So I think it can happen in the next 5-10 years if people who are sufficiently wealthy would take risks. Okay. Uh, Lots of other questions as always. Let's see what else do we have. Um, why is the super chat option not appearing in Mac OS? Only super stickers. It won't appear in Android also or in Windows because I've turned off the super chat option. I think it is obscene to answer questions in exchange for money. This is not what that's not what the channel is about. I had tried the super chat option a few times initially. I turned it on, but then what happened is that some people see when you do a super chat, it's very noticeable, it's very visible. So me, when I'm looking at the live chat, my eyes will be drawn to that. So then I'll end up answering more questions of those who are paying to ask questions. And there are lots of students on this channel who watch the channel, and students are broke. They have no money and they are not in a position to put super chats. So I think it's just wrong to divide my audience between those who can pay and those who can't pay. So that's why I've completely switched off the super chat option. I will treat everybody the same, and I will not take money for answering questions, which is so stupid. So that's why it's not there. It's by design that it's not there. Okay. Akash says, bring Abhijit Ayar Mitra back. His talks are genuine. What is Jai Shankar policy? I too didn't understand. Actually, I would be very happy, and I will certainly bring him back in a few months. Um, Whenever I go to Delhi next, I will be very happy to bring him back for another long discussion. It's always fun to talk to him. Um, when it comes to the Jai Shankar doctrine, I disagree with what he says. See, when I have a guest on a podcast, I will never interrupt the guest, and I will never argue with the guest, and I will never disagree with the guest. But those who watch me and those who follow me and those who watch this channel regularly will know what my positions are, right? So when I invite somebody for a podcast, I want to learn. I will first of all invite only those people that I find interesting and who have something to offer, from whom I can actually learn something. And I want to understand their position and their perspective. So I give them as much time as they want to say whatever they want to say, and I don't disagree with them. But here I will say that I don't agree with with his contention that the Jaishankar policy is a flop, or there is no Jaishankar doctrine. There is a Jaishankar doctrine, which is actually the Modi doctrine, and which is being implemented by Dr. Jaishankar. I think it's a very successful doctrine. It's a very successful approach thus far to geopolitics, to India's unique position in the world. It's tailor made for that, and it's designed to take India forward. And Abhijit Armitra did not agree with that, so that's fine. So I have a different position from what his position is. So that's something only those who watch this channel regularly will understand. I actually am very happy with the uh, geopolitical position that India has taken. Abhijit Armitra is a little more pessimistic when it comes to that. Obviously, he obviously also wants India to do very well, but he has a different way, maybe a different He wants it to be done maybe in a different way. Maybe he thinks it is not being done well enough or strongly enough, and that's okay. It's perfectly fine to have different opinions. Okay. Giuseppe Di Fraya says, do you think men and women can be platonic friends, roommates? I ask between because science says men and women are different in every way. P.S. I am being a simp for asking. Okay. Can men and women be platonic friends? I think it depends on the person. Roommates. I think it depends. I think some people are incapable of having that sort of a platonic relationship. I think some people can have it. Uh, yeah, men and women are definitely very different in every way. That's for sure. But once again, it all comes down to the individual. So there are certain people who would be able to have a platonic relationship with a roommate of the opposite gender, and some people may not be able to have it. So I think it all depends on the individual. You know. So yeah, I don't. That's my very simple, straightforward perspective on this. It depends on the person. Some people can do it, some people can't, irrespective of gender. Okay, what else? What else? What else? Lots of questions. Other questions. Okay, this is a speculative question. What would happen if Sardar Patel was the first PM of India instead of Nehru? I've answered this question maybe 78 times till now. I think India would have taken a different course. Mr. Patel died soon after India's the transfer of power in 1947. So maybe he would not have been a long-lasting Prime Minister of India, but he would most likely have prevented China from conquering Tibet, and maybe the Indian foreign policy would have been much more pragmatic, much more realistic, instead of being idealistic and stupid. So yeah, that's what I could say. In short, in the path India would have taken would have been significantly different from what it eventually took. Okay, okay. What else? um, let's see. Lots of other questions. Wopsy Creation says, "I'm a lawyer. What can I do for India?" I think what you can do for India is you excel at your profession. You do the best possible job you can on a daily basis in your profession. That's what you can do for India. We need people who have high standards. So whether you're a lawyer, whether you're a business person, whether you're a policeman or policewoman, whether you're a soldier, whether you are whatever, whether you're a teacher, do the best you can in your profession on a daily basis. Raise your standards. That's what you can do for India. If everybody does that, just imagine how better India will become. So that's what you can do for India. Raise your standards. Do the best you can. Rise to the fullest extent of your potential. Work consciously towards doing that. If each individual does this, India will be totally transformed. So that's what you can do for India. Okay, let's take a couple more questions. We have already reached almost 2 hours. Wow. Um, what else? What else? Controversy. Shall we go into controversial matters? Tanmoy says, "What's your view on same-sex marriage in India?" I think it is totally wrong to criminalize homosexuality. You know, so we have decriminalized homosexuality. It is the Narendra Modi government that did that. The Congress and other governments were in power for decades. They did not do it. They criminalized. They were happy to criminalize homosexuality. It was the Narendra Modi government that decriminalized homosexuality. So that is something that needed to be done, and we've done that. But if you look at human history, human history that we know of is about 10,000 years. Marriage has always been between men and women. So I think we should give the homosexual people the same rights when it comes to them not being criminalized or oppressed in any way. When it comes to marriage, I think the purpose of marriage is it's the foundation of society. It's to traditionally it's to procreate and all that, and obviously homosexuals cannot procreate. So I think we don't have to emulate the West in everything it does. The West is not a good role model for the world, which we are seeing very well when it comes to Europe and the US. So I think we have our own culture to draw to fall back upon. We have our own way of life. We are the world's oldest and greatest civilization. The world was civilized by us to a large extent. So we don't need to look at the West for guidance. We only have to look back at our own history and traditions. So from that perspective, I don't think we need same-sex marriage in India. We have done a very good thing by decriminalizing homosexuality. They can live their own life any way they want. We don't care. We don't, it doesn't bother us. They can do whatever they want. But I don't think marriage is required. You know, and I'm sure lots of people will disagree with me, which is fine. But I don't think there's any need for, or maybe there could be some category or whatever of them having, I don't know, as far as I'm concerned, I don't think there's any need for same-sex marriage in India. Decriminalization, I think, is good enough, which was a necessary action. Okay. um Rhea Mon says, I'm bisexual. I don't believe in marriage at all, be it between straight people or queer people. Well, that's fine. You can believe, you have the right to believe, to hold on to your own beliefs, which is fine. Don't get married. It's fine. No one's forcing anybody to either do it this way or that way. But yeah, totally fine. Um, Shaheen Wahman Zadegan says, what's the future of ISRO in the next decade? What are the major projects ISRO should work on when it comes to remaining the top three in the space race? So right now, who are the top three? NASA is a big deal. SpaceX is bigger, has a bigger operation than most nations, a private company. The Chinese space program they have dozens of launches every year. The French have lots of launches every year. So I think ISRO is not even in the top five right now, not even the top six, perhaps. And ISRO is capable of being in the top three for sure, but it needs funding. How many rockets do we launch every year? How many rockets did ISRO launch in 2022? I don't think it was even 10. You know, so it's a lack of ambition on the part of those who control and fund ISRO, which is the Indian government. The scientists can do, the engineers can do whatever we ask them to do. You know, what is ISRO's most powerful rocket? It is the GSLV Mark III, which has a new name these days. It's been rebranded, but it's the GSLV Mark III. It is a medium to light lift vehicle. There are rockets that are like 10 times, 100 times more powerful than the GSLV Mark III. And we are capable of building a rocket that's easily 10 times more powerful. But I don't know when it's going to happen. You need funding for that. You need a go ahead from the leadership for that. So I think ISRO is being constrained by a lack of ambition on the part of the Indian government. So I don't know what the future is. We're going to have the Chandrayaan 3 next month. No, this month. In a couple of weeks, Chandrayaan 3. Then we're going to have Gaganyaan at some point in time, maybe in 24, maybe in 25, which is the human space flight program, which again is like a technology demonstrator. But what next? What's the long-term plan? We don't know what the long-term plan or long-term vision is. I'm not sure the Indian government even has a long-term vision for the Indian space exploration program. The Chinese have a very clear vision of where they want to be in 2050 and where they want to be in 2100. They have a very clear vision. We don't have a vision. So I find this extremely disappointing. So I don't know what the future is. Will we even have a rocket that's 10 times more powerful in the next 10 years? I'm not sure about that also. So yeah, so the major projects, like you say, one is Chandrayaan, one is Gaganyaan, then you have Shukrayaan, which is a mission to Venus. But then what? It has to be part of an integrated long-term vision, which we don't seem to have. So we are not in the top three in the space race. I'm not sure if we are definitely not even in the top five in the space race. Somewhere in the top 10, in the bottom of the top 10. That's where we are, which is very disappointing. We could be in the top three or top two actually if we were to fund ISRO properly. Anyhow, that's one of the disappointing things. But there are many good things also in India. So yeah, I guess we can't have it all. Okay, what else do we have? Let me take one more question, perhaps, because we have now crossed the 2 hour limit. We can't do it forever. um, let's see. Let me take one more question. Uh, okay, Atharva says, what's your take on the North Korean defector Yeonmi Parks? Yeonmi Park. And what she says about food crisis in North Korea, is it really that bad? Well, I don't know what the truth is in North Korea. I don't have sufficient data. I haven't been there. And even if I were to go there, I'm sure I would only see some the good parts of North Korea. There may be some bad parts which I will not be able to see. So I can't say for sure. Um, I have seen a few of her interviews, some parts of that. I am not quite sure if she is very credible. She's become kind of a celebrity in the US, and she enjoys that. She enjoys the attention, and she wants to stay relevant. So I get the feeling she every time she talks, she makes the story a little more outlandish, a little more extreme. I get the feeling. I'm not sure if I'm right, but that's the feeling I get. Uh, so I'm not sure how credible she is. It's one person's account that we are hearing. I'm sure some of it is true. I'm not sure all of it is true. So we've got to be careful in what we believe, actually. That's what I'm saying. Right, that's about Yeonmi Park, the North Korean defector. Um, shall I take one more question? Uh, okay. Okay, I guess we are at the end of today's session. So yeah, I'm gonna end it over here. I can see lots of people are still asking me questions. I'm so sorry, but I am gonna have to stop it here. I always try to take as many questions as possible. So let's end it over here. Tomorrow I have a live stream in Hindi. So I've not done that for a long time. So lots of people, I get this request all the time. Please do a live stream in Hindi. Do videos in Hindi. So I'm gonna try to do a live stream in Hindi tomorrow. Let's see how well it goes. Same time tomorrow, 9 p.m. India time, on the Hindi channel, which is linked in this YouTube channel. Okay. So in case you want to see me speak Hindi and answer your questions in Hindi, join tomorrow's live stream at 9 p.m. Until then, take care. Thank you very much, everyone, for watching. And like I always say, keep raising your standards. Thank you. I'll see you very soon.